Ambassador McFaul, take me through what you thought first of what happened in the room, and if there's anything you can tell us about what hasn't been made public yet.
Well, first of all, thanks for the compare and contrast between Helsinki 2018 and Geneva 2021. I think it is important for everybody to remember what a disaster Helsinki was and how much of a correction this meeting was. In the meeting itself, we just hear the readouts of the two presidents. President Putin sounded like it was very constructive, workmanlike. He liked the tone. And President Biden did basically as well. There weren't giant achievements here. Let's be clear. When they put out a joint statement that they are going to talk about launching strategic stability talks, that's just a very first tiny step towards doing anything concrete. And they restored ambassadors. So their ambassadors, is going back to Washington, and our ambassador will go back to Moscow. But remember, Putin was the guy that moved out Ambassador Antonov in the first place. So that's not a big achievement. And I think President Biden said it very well in his press conference. He wanted to meet with Putin directly to try to see if they can cooperate on a few other steps. And by the way, Syria, Iran, some other issues, the Arctic came up as well. But the proof is in the pudding moving forward. So far, all they've done is set out aspirations. Now we'll see if we can actually concretely do anything together. And I think the verdict is still out on that.
One thing that is clearly the Russian strategy is to equate advocates for democracy in Putin's autocracy with the criminal insurrectionists in America. Ambassador McFaul, just talk about that. To me, it reeks of desperation. His buddy Donald Trump is gone, so let's side with the insurrectionists. It feels like low-hanging Fox News fruit, but is that what we are to believe of Vladimir Putin?
Well, Nicole, that for me was the most outrageous segment of Vladimir Putin's very lengthy press conference. It was like a greatest hits of his whataboutisms, but that was the worst. Because let's be clear, Alexei Navalny, the person he's calling an extremist, is peacefully exposing corruption in Russia to try to bring about democracy in Russia. And the insurrectionists that stormed the Capitol broke the law in the United States to seek to undermine democracy in the United States. So somehow to equate those things is radically wrong. And I'm glad President Biden called him out on that in his press conference. That was very appropriate in my view.
Ben Rhodes, as a message person, I am struck by the messages coming out from both men. I saw Ann Applebaum, who is I think always looking for sort of these signs of strength in defending the democracy itself, talking about a proportional response to be expected from Putin if there are more cyber aggressions. I wonder if you can sort of speak to what you heard behind some of the messages, which are always careful in these settings. And I think, as the ambassador is indicating, sometimes the real outputs and results become known in the coming weeks and months.
Well, I think for Putin, it was quite straightforward. I mean, that was the same litany of whataboutisms and denials that you'd expect here from Vladimir Putin. And he wants to basically pocket, in his view, the win of this summit, show that he's on par with the U.S. president. He's an equal as a superpower with the world's greatest superpower. And that's what he did. I think there was a number of things that I noticed about Joe Biden's messaging that was quite interesting. And first, hugely welcome that he just spoke up for things that Americans and people around the world want to see the American president speaking up for. When Alexei Navalny was poisoned by Vladimir Putin and nearly killed before he was detained, Donald Trump wouldn't even say his name. Quite like, by the way, Vladimir Putin, who won't say Alexei Navalny's name. And now we have an American president who's not just speaking generally about human rights, but very specifically about Alexei Navalny and the Russian opposition that has been so brutally targeted by Vladimir Putin. It was a shift to kind of a candor in the relationship in public that I think probably mirrored the messages that were delivered in private. I also think that Biden did an interesting job, Nicole, and you've been there in the White House, of setting expectations. He did not want to overpromise that this one meeting is going to transform this relationship or somehow change Vladimir Putin. What he did indicate is, look, I laid down some markers. And so, for instance, on this issue of cyber attacks, sure, Vladimir Putin came out and denied he did them and acted like there's no problem. But Biden made clear, look, I told him in private that there's going to be a response if this continues, and kind of laid down that marker and said, look, we're going to see what happens from the Russians over the next 6 months to a year. We're going to evaluate, are there going to continue to be these cyber attacks? Are we going to continue to see the kind of relentless crackdown of the opposition that we've seen there, support for autocrats like we've seen in Belarus? And Biden was kind of setting the table that if the ball is now in Vladimir Putin's court, and if he doesn't reciprocate by essentially curbing some of these excesses in his own behavior, there will be responses from the United States, but I'm not going to detail them precisely for you. So I think Biden was both setting expectations, delivering warnings, and speaking not just to the audience of the American people and the Russian people, but to the world, that the American president is once again going to speak up for basic democratic values and basic international norms and standards.
Jeremy, the fact that that is what is new is news in and of itself, that we have an American president using his bully pulpit to advocate for human rights. Let's listen to it.
It's not about just going after Russia when they violate human rights. It's about who we are. How could I be the president of the United States of America and not speak out against the violation of human rights? We don't derive our rights from the government. We possess them because we're born, period. And we yield them to a government. And so the forum, I pointed out to him that that's why we're going to raise our concerns about cases like Alexei Navalny. I made it clear to President Putin that we'll continue to raise issues of fundamental human rights, because that's what we are. That's who we are.
Jeremy Bash, your thoughts on that and everything you saw today?
Well, for 6 decades, Nicole, we've had a bipartisan consensus going all the way back to John F. Kennedy that the United States was going to confront first the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation on a range of issues, strategically containing them, but also speaking up for some universal democratic, small d, democratic values. And you saw that in the context of the United States in the 70s standing up for the rights of émigrés. You saw that in the context of support for the Solidarity movement and the lifting of the Iron Curtain around the time that the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the crumbling of the Soviet Empire. And you see that now, and you've seen that in the modern era on a bipartisan basis, with one exception, which is the past 4 years, Donald Trump didn't stand up to Putin. On the other hand, on the contrary, he not only gave him a yellow light, in some cases he gave him a green light. He welcomed the election interference. He welcomed the undermining of democracy. I think so many of the cyber attacks we've experienced are because we didn't establish deterrence. And so in some respects, the Biden administration and the West have been playing catch up. And how relieving it is to see that the West is now unified. It's resolute. There's a strong NATO alliance to stand up to Russian aggression. There's a strong alliance of democracies in the G7. The West is unified, and I think Biden went into this meeting today with Putin with the wind at his back. And I think the Biden administration got done this week what it wanted to do. It had the sharpened contrast between democracy and autocracy. And for the universal values we've been talking about, nothing, Nicole, nothing could be more important.